A couple of years ago, I did a video on my top 5 favorite ships to play in Star Trek Online. These weren't ships that were crazy meta or came with any crazy meta consoles or starship traits. These were just ships that I found fun, that thing we're supposed to be having in a video game. But that was 2 years ago, and Star Trek Online has released plenty of other ships since then, so I figured let's update this list a little bit. Okay, we'll get the obvious one out of the way first, and that's going to be the Terran Lexington Miracle Worker Dreadnought. Don't worry, this will be the only repeat from the previous list, but come on, you guys know I had to include this ship because you guys know how much I love the Odyssey class. Though this also goes to show you how long it's been since I did that last video, because back then I probably would have said the Yorktown was my favorite ship in Star Trek. That kind of changed when the Odyssey revamp finally came out. But of course the Lexington can use any of the Odyssey variant skins, so if you prefer the Yorktown, or the Sojourner, or the Endeavor, or the Verity, you can use those skins on this ship too, or any of its parts, and kind of mix and match them. The reason why I like the Lexington over all the other playable versions of the Odyssey best is because it's the one that suits my favorite playstyle the best. I really like energy weapon builds in Star Trek Online, and in particular I really like Fire at Will, which allows me to fire beams in every freaking direction. And while technically you can make Fire at Will work on pretty much any kind of ship, Lexington is very ideal for that setup because it is a Miracle Worker Dreadnought. Miracle Worker seating is really ideal for energy weapons because of abilities like narrow sensor bands, which will further buff said energy weapons. Another nice thing about Miracle Worker ships is the extra universal console slot that they get, so that's one more console slot you get on this ship in comparison to any other specialization. There are a lot of really nice consoles in Star Trek Online, and a lot that you just want to have for the sake of fun, so it gets kind of hard to pick and choose which ones you want to keep and which ones not to keep, so having an extra console slot is really nice. Another reason why I like this version of the Odyssey is because it is a Dreadnought. Dreadnoughts are big, bulky cruisers, and I love big, bulky cruisers. I love just a big ship that just takes up a lot of space, that just moves through enemies, and is just completely unbothered by them. But Dreadnoughts are nicer than your typical cruiser because, one, they get a little extra crit chance in the Mastery package, but also because they get a hangar bay. And that's how the Lexington checks off another box for me because I also love pet builds. A second hangar bay would be nicer, but as of yet, we have yet to get an Odyssey variant that is also a flight deck carrier, despite all of my hoping and begging. Another added bonus to this ship is that because it's a Dreadnought, it also gets a Spinal Lance cannon. Not all Dreadnoughts get one of those in Star Trek Online, but fortunately, Lexington did. Now, a Spinal Lance cannon isn't a super powerful weapon in Star Trek Online, but it is still a fun thing to have on a ship. The next ship in this top 5 list is going to be the Terran Hydra Intel Destroyer. This is one of my absolute favorite escort-type ships to play in Star Trek Online. It's a destroyer, so it's actually a little bit beefier than your average escort, but the Hydra specifically comes with a really fun toy, and that is the Multi-Vector Assault mode. And that's because the Hydra is a variant of the Prometheus class. Now, the Multi-Vector Assault mode has never been a super powerful feature in Star Trek Online. In fact, it's actually fairly weak, but the Hydra does come with a console and trait that does further improve on the feature itself, making it a much more viable playstyle, which is really nice because I find it to be really fun. Because, again, I really like pet builds, and having your ship split into 3 separate parts is basically just a different sort of pet build. The Hydra is an Intel ship, meaning it's also well-suited to energy weapon builds, but for different reasons than a Miracle Worker ship. Intel gets abilities like override subsystem safeties that will increase your weapon power as well as all your other power levels, and also gives access to surgical strikes, which is a very powerful energy weapon firing mode, which is exclusive to the Intel specialization. Though personally I don't use it all that much because I'm not a big fan of single target builds. Instead, I generally go for a good old-fashioned cannon scatter volley build. Now, full disclosure, the Hydra wasn't actually my first choice for this slot on this list. In an earlier draft, I had actually chosen the Theseus Miracle Worker Destroyer. One of the big reasons I like the Theseus so much is because of its unique comic book origins, but I realized a lot of the reasons why I liked it as a playable ship are a lot of the same reasons why I like the Lexington, in that it's basically a smaller, more maneuverable version of the Lexington. So I felt that the Hydra ends up standing out more on its own. Plus, the Prometheus is an old-school favorite of mine. I remember this ship as a kid, seeing it for the first time, this really sharp angles on it. It looked so different from anything else in Starfleet, but still looked distinctly Starfleet. I really loved that look on it. Plus, the lore of it being this experimental deep space tactical vessel, I thought that was really cool. I really dug the vibe of this ship. So it's just fun to play as that within the game. Next up is a much more recent release into Star Trek Online, the Premonition Temporal Science Spearhead. The Premonition is a bit unique compared to the other ships on this list because this one actually doesn't originate from Star Trek Online or from one of the shows or movies. It actually originates from a different Star Trek video game, that being Star Trek Armada, which was released back in 2000. The premonition plays a key part in Star Trek Armada's story, being a time ship sent back in time to warn the Federation of an impending Borg invasion. And I always felt that was a really interesting idea, that being that the Federation would build a purpose-built time ship. And I always thought that was a really neat idea for the Federation to make a purpose-built time ship, especially in that era. Armada takes place in 2376, and while it's never directly stated what year the premonition is from, it's kind of given the impression that it's not very far from the future. In fact, the premonition's captain, Thaddeus Deming, was wearing the same gray-shouldered uniform that they wore throughout the next-gen movies and the latter part of Deep Space Nine. Though they did switch up the colors again for some reason, because Deming was wearing gold. But even with that, I still think that it gave the impression that the premonition was probably from, like, mid-2380s at the latest. Now I'm just rambling about lore about the premonition. Anyway, the reason I like this ship is just I thought it looked cool, and it was an interesting concept, and it was from an old Star Trek game that I really liked. I played a lot of Star Trek Armada as a kid, and as a young adult, and last week. But yeah, when they announced that they were bringing the premonition into Star Trek Online, along with the Achilles and the Typhon, I was absolutely ecstatic. I have so much nostalgia for this ship. Now, if I'm being honest, I'm not the biggest fan of science ships in Star Trek Online. Frankly, I find EPG and control builds, stuff you would normally associate with a science ship, to be kind of weird and kind of confusing. Typically, I prefer to default to something more thematic to the shows, and I don't think either of those build types are that conducive to that. So when they announced that the premonition was going to be a temporal science spearhead, I was a bit annoyed, and I still stand by my opinion that the ship should have been a temporal battlecruiser, but I don't lament the fact that it ended up being a spearhead. In fact, it's actually kind of given me a renewed interest in science builds, because, as I said in my build video for this thing, I was very determined to like the premonition. And after getting some help putting together a up-to-date EPG build, which is something I hadn't done in years, I really did enjoy this ship and its ability to just throw anomalies all over the place. Is it the best science ship in the game? No. In fact, I don't think it's even the best one in the C-Store. I'm pretty sure that's the Chekhov. But I like this one, because it has that nostalgia factor and reminds me of what it felt like to be 10 years old again playing Star Trek Armada. Next up, the World Razor Temporal Ops Juggernaut. For a lot of people, the appeal of the World Razor is that it's, the evil Enterprise D, it being Picard's ship from the Confederation timeline. But for me, it's the fact that it's a Galaxy class. We all know that the Odyssey class is my favorite ship in Star Trek, but the Odyssey class hasn't been around forever. And before its release, back then, I probably would have said that the Galaxy class is my favorite ship. What can I say? I have a type. Curvy. Yes, I'm still talking about fictional spaceships. What do you think I was talking about? Now, there are multiple other playable Galaxy-class ships in Star Trek Online, but this one is by far my favorite for a number of different reasons. One, it's a freaking juggernaut. Not only does it have a juggernaut array, but its juggernaut array is phaser-based, so it pairs really well with phaser builds, and it has exceptional bridge officer seating, having a temporal command combo, a commander-level tactical seat, and just enough universal seating to keep things interesting. And because this thing is built on the Galaxy-class skeleton, it can use all of the old Galaxy-class consoles, like saucer separation and antimatter spread. So that way you can balance authenticity to the show with really awesome ship stats, which is really all I want from any ship in Star Trek Online, really. Is that really so much to ask for? It probably is, but I'm still going to. Now, for this last one, I really had to put some thought into narrowing it down to one last ship for my top 5 favorite playable ships in Star Trek Online. I mentioned earlier I strongly considered the Theseus. Legendary Avenger was also a strong contender, but was cut for the same reason as Theseus. Legendary Valdor also almost made the list, but ultimately I decided on the legendary Akira Command Multi-Mission Cruiser. Like with most of the ships on this list, the Akira is an old favorite of mine. To me, the Akira's design has always been so strikingly unique that it can't help but stand out, even when it's only serving as a background ship. It also has really interesting lore, both being a torpedo cruiser having 16 different torpedo tubes on the ship, while also technically being a carrier vessel. A legendary version of the Akira class was something both I and Augmented Dictator Games campaigned for a long time, probably at least 2 years. And while the legendary version that we got wasn't exactly what either of us had in mind, it still hit a lot of the keynotes that we wanted. Mainly that it needed to be able to function as a torpedo boat, because, like I said earlier, 16 torpedo tubes, which the ship ends up serving as very well, being a full command ship. And being a multi-mission cruiser meant that the ship could have a hangar bay. Though, of course, these days, after seeing the Typhon release, makes me wonder why couldn't Legendary Akira be something a little bit closer to that? But whatever. I'm already desperately trying to get one ship made, I don't need to add Akira Command Escort Carrier to that list as well. Or do I? But despite all that, I do still really like the Legendary Akira for all the reasons I just stated, but also for the fact that it has a secondary Miracle Worker seat. While the Command Miracle Worker pairing does have some issues, most of which being a lack of unconventional systems triggers, it does allow for a good amount of versatility for the ship, because while the Command seating makes it viable for a torpedo build, the Miracle Worker seating makes it viable for an energy weapon build. So Legendary Akira can have a good amount of versatility, meaning it can appeal to a wider variety of players. So yeah, those are my top 5 favorite ships to play in Star Trek Online as of October 9th, 2024. Like I said, none of these were chosen just because they were crazy meta or because they come with any crazy powerful starship traits or consoles. I just enjoy playing them because they're fun for me, and that's all I really need for this video. So let me know what some of your favorites are down below in the comments down below, and while you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. If you would like to further support the channel, you can hit that join button to become a member, or you can find the link to the merch store down below, or if you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701. Any of these really help me out, and I really do appreciate it. Either way, though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.